Hey y'all, this is Gray Crawford back with you again to talk about the astrology for the week ahead, June 2nd until June 8th of 2025. This is yet another pivotal week in all the great changes going on this year. But in contrast to some of the past periods of intensified astrological change, this week has much more in terms of supportive, generative, life affirming aspects and supportive astrology, especially in terms of Venus finally leaving Aries and finally returning to her home of Taurus. This is also the final week of our experience of Jupiter in Gemini. And before Venus comes into Taurus, she will form a supportive, harmonious, sextile aspect with Jupiter, bringing the two benefic planets into a supportive alliance, just as Venus prepares to return to her own sign. The benefic planets, Venus and Jupiter, are all about the support of life and growth and generation and bringing things into being. In contrast to the malefic planets Saturn and Mars, which are said to be extreme and excessive, Jupiter and Venus are more about moderation. And so this is going to be really helpful this week to finally get Venus returning to her own sign. And then next week, as we come into the upcoming full moon, we will get Jupiter leaving Gemini to enter his exaltation of Cancer. So in the next couple of weeks, we are going to get a dramatic improvement in essential dignity of these two benefic planets. And this week, it is going to be Venus returning to her home and being able to directly express her celestial nature. Now, this helpful boost of Jupiter and Venus having supportive aspects this week will be helpful because we are still adjusting to that extraordinary ingress of Saturn into Aries on May 24th that happened just before that recent new moon in Gemini. And so we have collectively and personally been experiencing an intensification of Saturn and Neptune coming together in that first couple degrees of Aries. This goes with things fundamentally changing and accelerating with change. And whether or not you've been experiencing difficulties with that recent ingress of Saturn into Aries or more productive types of change and acceleration of new things happening in your life, this return of Venus to Taurus this week, this sextile aspect between Venus and Aries and Jupiter and Gemini, are going to be really helpful for getting back into the joys and the pleasures of your life, moderating and tempering whatever has come out of balance, being able to have more astrological support for reaching out to others, getting help from others, being in community and forming helpful alliances with others, getting the support you need, whether that's through personal relationships or community resources, and just in general, moderating whatever has been accelerating and becoming out of balance with all the great changes going on all around us. But most of all, this week, our greatest ally will be our friend Hermes, as Mercury in Gemini will be moving quickly at Mercury's top speed. The fleet footed messenger will be emerging from his recent conjunction with the sun into visibility as an evening star, sharing his light with us in that liminal shift of hues that happen during sunset. And most importantly of all, Mercury will be moving through a supportive aspect with Mars into a very powerful conjunction with Jupiter at the very end of Gemini, just as Jupiter is finally getting ready to leave the sign of Gemini. This conjunction between Mercury and Jupiter in Gemini will be so powerful for bringing deeper meaning and vision into all of your writing, communication. If you have different business deals or negotiations to make, that power of Jupiter to deepen things in meaning, to generate wealth and material support, will be combining with that nimble intellectual dexterity and mental capacities of Mercury. And so it's a very powerful combination, especially if you've been doing some writing or research projects, or there's some sort of legal dilemma you've been facing, or some sort of negotiation you've been needing to make. Whatever it is, there's so many things that Mercury helps us with in our daily interactions and our deals and our writing and our translations and our interpretations and our communication. We have incredible support for it this week. And so, all in all, this is a very powerful week to return to center, to look at what's been changing in your life, to look at what needs to be addressed, and to make it happen, to get the support you need, and to get some generative growth going forward as we approach the full moon in Sagittarius that will come next week. And so the week begins on Monday, June 2nd, with the first quarter moon in Virgo. This is that lunar phase of half light, half darkness with increasing light. It's a lunar phase that promotes growth and increased vitality and heat and things warming up with the increased light, to go after things, to build things, to bring things into form. And that moon in Virgo is in the sign of Mercury in Gemini, with both the Sun and Mercury and Jupiter all together in Gemini. And so there is a lot of ability here for mental activity and making lots of mental connections. Now, what happens then is the moon on Monday will move towards square aspects with Mercury and Jupiter that will come into effect on Tuesday, June 3rd. So on Tuesday, June 3rd, the moon will move across a square aspect with Mercury towards a square aspect with Jupiter. And so the moon moving from a square with Mercury into a square with Jupiter will increase our capacity to be generating ideas, making the connections we need, formulating writing, formulating research, getting our ideas in motion, making the connections out in the community and within our personal relationships for whatever it is we need to do. Yet, at the same time, although this is a lunar phase of waxing growth, the moon is forming a conjunction with the south node of the moon in Virgo on Tuesday. And so while the lunar phase on Tuesday is supportive of material growth, the fact that the moon in Virgo is forming a conjunction with her own south node goes more with the need to process and digest all the big changes that have been happening recently in your life. There may be something you need to release or let go of. But at the same time as there are things you might be feeling like you need to deeply process and release or let go of, there may also be very powerful ideas and realizations that you are harvesting. There will be underlying support in general for some positive outcomes, because at the same time this is all happening on Tuesday, Venus in Aries is applying towards a harmonious sextile aspect with Jupiter in Gemini all day. And so, because we have Venus and Jupiter coming together in this harmonious relationship, it's really going to be supportive in terms of your life. And one thing that might be helpful because of the moon in Virgo being with that south node, it's to also embrace practices of gratitude and what you can be grateful for, and just focusing in on the small things that you can take pleasure and joy in during your day that bring you satisfaction, that give you this sense of meaning and joy in your life. The next day, Wednesday, June 4th, we experience the exact sextile between Venus and Aries and Jupiter in Gemini. But earlier in the day, we first experienced the moon leaving the sign of Virgo to enter the sign of Libra. And as soon as the moon enters the sign of Libra, the moon will be closely applying to an opposition with Saturn in Aries as well as Neptune in Aries. Now, for the past few years, we've had Saturn in Pisces. And so we would always get each month the moon in Virgo forming an opposition with Saturn. This is something new. Now we are going to be having the phenomenon where each month when the moon enters Libra, the moon will right away form an opposition with Saturn in Aries. Now, Saturn in Aries is said to have its fall in Aries, whereas Saturn is exalted in Libra. And one quality of Saturn in Aries that is heightened is that quality of Saturn that can separate from others or be more divisive. Saturn in Aries can want to go off and do its own thing. And this can be really powerful in ways of becoming more authentic or when things need to become more countercultural or go against the grain. But the quality of Aries that can really be extremely innovative and inventive, but can also go off and strike out on its own, removed from others and removed from the relationship needs of others at time. This is going to need to be tempered and moderated. And so each month now, when the moon enters Libra and forms this opposition with Saturn and Neptune, it's going to be a perfect time to recalibrate and rebalance and check in with the ways you are getting these big innovative ideas related to Saturn and Neptune, or the ways you have been responding or reacting to the way the world is changing and the way you're also yourself changing and having big inner shifts and big inner realizations and checking in with how whatever that process is going on for you, how is it affecting your relationships and how you're fitting into the community around you. I think the moon in Libra doing this on a monthly basis is going to be really important for mediating and modulating this powerful influence of Saturn and Neptune in Aries. And because on this particular day, when we first experience this for the first time, I love the fact that Venus in Aries is forming an exact sextile aspect with Jupiter in Gemini, because again, it really speaks to me about the ways that we can be developing supportive relationships in the community and within our personal spheres for whatever it is we need or whatever it is we need to develop, as well as hopefully cohering a more creative vision about what we are having to let go of with all the things changing, as well as what we can be embracing and honing in on to develop and build in the year ahead. And then on Thursday, June 5th, the moon in Libra will move away from that opposition with Saturn and Neptune and form a flowing trine aspect with the sun in Gemini, and then separate from that trine with the sun towards harmonious aspects with Mars in Leo and Mercury in Gemini. And that is very fortuitous and supportive because at the same time, Mercury in Gemini will be forming a harmonious sextile aspect with Mars in Leo. Now, what does all of this mean? This just gives a lot of firepower and heat and courage and boldness and vitality to formulate, again, what is the vision that you've been developing? What do you really want to create? And if you can focus in on whatever that is right here, there is great astrological support for making very significant progress. So if you are in a good place like that and really able to focus on developing something, this is a great day to really just go for it. There is great support for making something happening here. Now, the other thing that's happening on Thursday, June 5th, is that Venus is coming to the very, very end of Aries. And what a story we've all experienced with Venus and Aries this year. The whole opening 6 months of this year, in many ways, has been dominated by Venus and Aries, because even though she didn't go into Aries until February, she spent months being retrograde in Aries, going back into Pisces, and then coming forward again into Aries. And although there are a lot of great things about Aries and that fiery quality that we can use with Venus in our creative endeavors, Venus is in her opposite sign of Aries whenever she's in Aries, because it is a sign of Mars. And there is some tension in the differential meaning between Venus and Mars. And so Venus is out of her element in Aries. She's as far away from her home in Libra as she can be. And so while Venus and Aries can be a great activist, can be very inspirational with making change and being creative and being innovative, it's not a sign that allows Venus to directly express herself. So we haven't been able to have that direct expression of Venus pleasure and joy and relatedness and creativity in the same way that we can experience Venus when she does return to her home sign of Taurus. And so, depending upon your time zone, for those of you in the Pacific time zone, it will be later in the day on Thursday when Venus returns to her home sign of Taurus. For others, it will be on Friday, June 6th. In the Eastern time zone, it will happen not too long after midnight, in the middle of the night on early Friday, June 6th. For others of you in other time zones, this could end up being around the early morning when she comes into Taurus. But wherever you are, what is wonderful is that when the sun rises on Friday, which is the day of Venus and the hour of Venus, Venus will be back in her home sign of Taurus. As I've mentioned, getting Venus back into her own sign, getting a benefic planet like Venus back in her own sign, as she's also in a very bright morning star phase here, is going to bring lots of support. And the support that Venus can bring in her own sign of Taurus can relate to relatedness and creativity and pleasures and joys. But if we think about Taurus in particular, it is an earth sign. It is more practical. It can be more grounded. It can work towards long term, stable change. It can be a stabilizing influence. And Venus in her morning star phase also is more practical, is more assertive. And so this is going to be a great support for focusing in on what it is you want to create, what is going to bring you joy, what can help you in recovering from whatever setbacks you may have had recently, and putting that into effect and putting that into motion. And what I especially love about this day, in addition to Venus being in Taurus, is that the moon is in Libra, which is the sign of Venus. And the moon is applying closely to a trine aspect with Mercury and a trine aspect with Jupiter. And so our experience of Friday, June 6th has so much support. Not only do we have Venus back in her sign of Taurus, the moon will be moving through flowing trine aspects with both Mercury in Gemini as well as Jupiter in Gemini, while Mercury and Jupiter are applying to a conjunction at the exact same time. This is an incredibly intellectual and mentally stimulating transit for this day. And so it could be a really great day to be interacting with others, having important conversations with others, working through whatever types of negotiations you've been needing to do. Or if you just have some real important creative work, research, writing, really making the space and time to focus on that and make it happen, because this can be a very generative, productive day in all of those ways. The moon will also, at the same time the moon's forming those flowing trine aspects with Mercury and Jupiter, will also be moving through a sextile with Mars. And so there can be a lot of boldness and taking a courageous leap forward in whatever it is that you've been working on. Now, one thing about Venus returning to her home sign of Taurus that I haven't spoken about yet is that it also means she will immediately be applying towards a square aspect with Pluto in Aquarius. And so there is some real depth that is going to be opened up here. And what I hope you can experience is coming more into relationship with whatever has been going on for you with your experience with Pluto in Aquarius. That's going to really vary from person to person, but hopefully there are ways that you can come into relationship with the more empowering side of this Pluto transit for you. So in case you've been having some difficult setbacks recently related to Pluto and that's impacting your chart, hopefully this Venus moving through Taurus and coming into relationship with Pluto can bring you the support you need. Otherwise, it can be very helpful for gaining the greater courage to go after more of whatever types of ambitions and dreams and new ideas that have been constellating for you in relation to Pluto in Aquarius. And so, whatever has been going on for you related to Pluto and Aquarius, and however Venus and Taurus is going to affect that, we are going to come into a very strong relationship with on Saturday, June 7th, because the moon will come into Scorpio. The moon will form an opposition with Venus and then move into a square aspect with Pluto. This may bring up some deeper layers of relational dynamics, for example, that need to be addressed. But the fact that Venus is in Taurus, the fact that Mercury is coming into this conjunction with Jupiter, to me means that whatever is going on with that, if there are things you need to work out in different types of relationships, there are going to be some supportive astrological aspects happening at the same time to help you work through whatever that is. Whether it means you need to really engage more deeply in certain conversations, whether there's certain things you need to just not be engaging with and having boundaries about. You'll figure it out, whatever it is. But I think it's a really good day for getting some deep self realization about what has been going on. Of course, the moon in Scorpio is always going to pick up a lot of emotional undercurrents of what's going on. But because we have Mercury and Jupiter coming together at the same time, I really feel there will be a lot of opportunities for profound meaning making with whatever that is. And then on Sunday, June 8th, we will finally experience the conjunction between Mercury and Jupiter in Gemini that has been building all week. And this is happening at the same time Mercury is becoming visible as an evening star. And so Mercury is leaping into visibility, becoming intensified in potency and this whole new seed of meaning. And what's fascinating is this is in contrast to Jupiter, who is coming to the end of his time in Gemini, as well as the end of his time of being visible. And so, in contrast to Mercury, he's moving from being invisible into being visible. Jupiter's moving from being visible into his invisible phase. And so, there is something just fascinating about this. One thing that is obvious is you can go back during this week and especially this upcoming weekend and spend some time thinking about and contemplating your experience of Jupiter and Gemini this past year. It can be really helpful to do a review like that and just take account of how things have been changing and also start thinking a little bit more about the new change in meaning that's going to happen with Jupiter entering his exaltation of Cancer on June 9th, the very next day. That is going to bring a big boost of life affirming growth and generation into all of our lives. So it's a very hopeful transit that we are just on the cusp of experiencing. But because we have Mercury and Jupiter combining in Gemini, it is really powerful for generating some new ideas and new visions. And of course, Mercury is so good at being changeable and shifting and navigating us in a different direction, getting our story moving in a different direction if we need that, if things have become too stagnant or stuck. And Jupiter is in Mercury's sign here. And so this is bringing that depth of meaning and wisdom and vision of Jupiter into all of those incredible mercurial skills. And so there can hopefully be some very powerful insights for you as we come into this conjunction on Sunday, and big realizations about your life. Again, if you have creative projects, especially writing, communication, research, anything like that, this is really a combination to take advantage of. And so in the Eastern time zone, this conjunction between Mercury and Jupiter and Gemini will take place at about 4:11 p.m. So it's a little bit after 1 p.m. on Sunday for those of you in the Pacific time zone. And you can see that when they form this conjunction, they are at the very, very end of Gemini. Now, simultaneously, when this is happening, the moon in Scorpio is heading into a square aspect with Mars in Leo, as well as an opposition with Uranus in Taurus. Now, this potentially could stir up some conflict and tension in certain dynamics. So, if that's going on, just be aware of that. But especially in terms of how that moon will move away from Mars into the opposition with Uranus as the Mercury Jupiter conjunction is separating, I think it could be very powerful in terms of big breakthrough ideas that could come in with this. And then later in the day, not long after the Mercury Jupiter conjunction, in fact, at about 7 o'clock p.m. in Eastern time zone, or about 4 p.m. in Pacific time zone on Sunday, Mercury will leave his home sign of Gemini and enter Cancer. This entrance of Mercury into Cancer is very powerful because Mercury immediately forms a square aspect with Saturn and Neptune. And so, just like this week, we had the experience of getting that first experience of the moon in Libra forming an opposition with Saturn and Neptune in Aries. Here we're going to get our first experience of Mercury coming into Cancer and any cardinal sign, and how it will then immediately be hitting one of these hard aspects with Saturn and Neptune. There's definitely some tension involved in these aspects here as we get a little bit later in the day on Sunday, in terms of having Mercury clashing with Saturn and Neptune, and the moon setting off Mars and Uranus at the same time. So just have some awareness around that. It's nothing to be afraid of or worried about too much, but there definitely could be some deep realizations coming in here. And so there definitely is some tension with these aspects coming in later in the day on Sunday, with Mercury coming into Cancer and clashing with Saturn and Neptune, and the moon in Scorpio setting off Mars and Uranus. So just be aware of that. But I do like the Mercury connection with Saturn and Neptune in terms of Mercury moving away from that conjunction with Jupiter as Mercury is becoming visible. And then Mercury is immediately making us come into relationship with whatever is happening with Saturn and Neptune. So I do think even if you have some difficult realizations or tensions you have to work out here, it's going to be things you necessarily have to face out of necessity. So this is a good day to be getting clear about what are some of the things that need to be addressed or changed. And keep in mind that the moon in Scorpio is going to be picking up a lot of emotions, a lot of material. And so we'll also need to maybe take some practices and space to help calm and center and work with whatever could be coming up with that. And so that brings us to the end of the week. And remember, as I mentioned, the very next day on Monday, June 9th, we will have the entrance of Jupiter into his exaltation of Cancer. I'll have more to say about that in a subsequent video. If you'd like to talk about how to work with all of this astrology that's happening in empowering ways, My books are open for June, and you can schedule a reading with me. I will put a link below in the comments and description to this video so that you can book a session with me. I'll also put a link in the description below to my Patreon community. There are some extra discounts that you get for working with me through joining my Patreon, as well as extra material and videos that I share there that I don't share elsewhere. There are also two tiers, the cedar tier as well as the oak tier, that each have additional monthly classes happening. And so, depending on what tier you join, there are potentially two different live astrology classes that you could be part of with my Patreon community. So, please check that out below. Otherwise, it would be great if you could like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. It really helps me out. Well, that's it for this week. I hope you have a rewarding week of coming into deeper relationship with whatever is going to be bringing you joy and enlivening your creativity in these fast moving times.